Welcome back to the Point of Order podcast, an inside look at California politics in the state legislature. I am your host, Assemblyman Josh Hoover, and really great to have one of our favorite guests back on the show, Tom Sheehy, Sheehy Strategy Group. How's it going, Tom? Thanks for coming back.
It's going great, Josh. Happy New Year, and thank you very much for inviting me back to the Point of Order podcast. It's awesome.
Absolutely. Yes, first podcast of the new year, and as always, one of the two that we do on the budget every year. We try to do one in January when the governor releases his state budget, and then another one in May when the May revise happens.
That's great.
Always love having your expertise, and obviously great to be back. We did take, we didn't really take any time off, but definitely had a great holidays. How was your holidays?
It was busy. We did manage to squeeze a 3-week trip into Europe, and we saw France, Germany, Switzerland, and really enjoyed it. And then we got back, and we were working our tails off because clients had stuff that they needed done.
Yeah.
There was not a whole lot of sitting around relaxing. It was a lot of... The travel was great.
Travel's good.
But you know how travel is. You're on planes and trains and boats, and it was fun. It was fun.
Yeah, we actually did that. We didn't travel much at all. We sort of stayed around here. My kids, this might be the last time this ever happens because my oldest is about to turn 17 this week, which is pretty hard to comprehend for myself. But we all spent the break like watching Stranger Things. And all three of our kids and, obviously me and my wife are kind of into it at the same time, which there's very few things in our lives where we're all kind of into right at the same time. And it culminated with seeing the finale in the movie theater on New Year's Eve. So it's pretty fun.
That's very cool. That's very cool. And enjoy every moment with that 17-year-old because you just see less and less of them.
Yeah. So over the break, he got his driver's license. And so I'm already seeing less of him, right? It's he feels very free to roam the city and go hang out with his friends now, which is really cool. Also helping drive his sister around to school and stuff, which is cool. So
nice.
Yeah, it's good.
Nice.
Overall, it's a win, but a little nerve-wracking too.
Yeah, I bet your insurance rates went up too.
Oh my, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, it's scary.
I got some new bills in 2026. Let's put it that way.
I was so glad when my kids got old enough they could get their own insurance, man.
Yeah, no, it's... I'm going to turn that over to him as soon as I'm able to, but we'll see what happens with that. One icebreaker I wanted to start out with, didn't know if you had any. In fact, I got a list here somewhere of my own, but any New Year's resolutions, right?
Yes.
This is the time of year where everyone's making their plans for 2026.
Even though I need to lose weight, I'm not on a diet per se, but with my wife's help, and she's just awesome at this, I'm putting a lot of focus on cutting out as much as possible highly refined and highly processed foods. And so that's not eliminating anything particular, but really trying to eat more fresh.
That's good.
And lots of vegetables. I love vegetables, and I'm a gardener, so that helps.
That's
but
great.
Also, fresh protein, seafood, meat, and dairy, and things like that. And I feel that if I can do that and get some more walking in, that'll help shed some of the pounds I need to shed.
I love it. That's good. That is on my list as well. Definitely some weight loss for 2026. Last year, I had a resolution to exercise 6 days per week, which is probably too aggressive. And so, it probably ended up being more like 3 or 4.
That's not bad. 3 or 4 is
but
good.
Hey, I'll take it, right? And so
3 or 4 is good.
Gonna keep working on that. Another one last year. My other one last year was read at least 5 books, which sounds kind of like nothing, right? That's really easy. But
except in your job, you're reading all the time.
Quit reading. I'm always reading, but I quit reading books, sort of, in this, since I've been in the assembly. I haven't read a lot of books. And so last year I'm like, I really want to read. And I do audiobooks, by the way. So I know there's controversy on whether or not that counts, but
it should, because I think you still have to put the time in.
You do.
You got to put the time in.
So I ended up doing 25 books last year after I set a goal to read 5, which was weird.
Oh my goodness, that's a lot.
I know. I kind of went crazy on it and just read a bunch of books. So
was it fiction and nonfiction?
It was, if you look at my list, it was just a smattering of things. Yeah, fiction, nonfiction. It was all over the map. This year I'll probably be a little more intentional about what I'm reading, but I'm probably going to try to just read 1 book a month this year. That's kind of one of my goals. So,
well, that's setting a great example for the younger generation who spends way too much time on devices and not enough time with their nose looking at books.
Yeah, no, it's good. And then my last one is probably try to be on time a little more. I think
You're a legislator.
I know, it's impossible, right? It's no, it truly is. I feel like I'm always, a meeting will run long and then you're late to the next meeting, and it creates this like cycle of lateness. And I'm going to see what I can do there. I don't know.
Okay. Well, you were on time this morning. That's a good
I
start.
was on time this morning. That's right. Yeah, exactly. So, we'll see how that goes. But no, thanks for sharing those. And, honestly, I try to set goals that are achievable, because I know there was a lot of years where I, set New Year's resolutions and failed right away. And now I'm just like, let's do something I think I can actually do.
Yeah.
So
Schwarzenegger was quoted sometime leading up to New Year's, and they were talking to him about New Year's resolutions and this and that. And he said, "Look," he said, I'm not going to imitate him, but he said, they don't work.
Yeah.
So they'll work for a few weeks and then you fall off. He said the key, and what I did and what I recommend all you to do, is establish a routine. Mm-hmm. And then when you wake up in the morning, whether you feel good or feel bad, you follow the routine. And his whole thing was about just set a routine and follow the routine. And then he said over time, then that develops habit patterns that will allow you to be successful in what it is you're doing. I thought that was good advice.
Good. I think that's good. I think really it has to be sustainable, right? It has to be something you're going to do every day. You're going to be able to get into that habit.
100%.
And that's what causes the success, right? If you start off like I'm gonna go to the gym every single day, I'll never miss a day. It's
that's a hard one to keep.
I remember one of my favorite comedians, Jim Gaffigan, has a joke where he talks about we go like, I'm gonna go to the gym every day, and then you go to the gym, and then the next day you're like, well, not every day.
I'm a little sore.
I'm a little sore today. I gotta rest my body today.
Oh, man.
So that's sort of how our brains tend to work. But a few things to go over this week. Obviously, it was a very busy first week of the legislature. We'll get into that, but tell us just briefly, just remind the listeners about your background.
Sure.
Why you're so interested in budget stuff.
Sure. Well, thanks again for inviting me on. And for your viewers who haven't seen me before, for those that don't remember, I played a pretty big role for a number of years in shaping the state budget. I was an analyst at the California Department of Finance early in my career, and then later I became staff at the legislature, and I worked in the Appropriations Committee and Budget Committees in the legislature. And then, like many do, I left the legislature and worked in the private sector, doing government affairs work. But then when Arnold Schwarzenegger was elected governor, I got recruited to come back. And he made me first his deputy director of the Department of Finance, where I was in charge of doing all the testimony and the legislative hearings and talking with
the fun
legislators
stuff.
like you. It was great. It was a really fun job.
Yeah.
And then I did pretty good at that. And then the governor promoted me to chief deputy director of the Department of Finance. And and there's two chief deputies, one for policy, one for budget. I was his policy person. Ana Mata Santos was his chief deputy for budget. But I was in the middle of everything as it relates to Department of Finance and creating the state budget. I sat in a lot of briefings directly with the governor. And what was particularly meaningful about that, and especially considering some of the fiscal things going on now, is I was there when we went into the Great Recession. I got appointed by the governor first in 2006, and then it was in 2008 when we went into the Great Recession. Wow. So Mike Janest and I were literally two of the senior staff that were briefing the governor saying, look, this storm's coming in and it's going to be a doozy. So just being part of that, I mean, it was a difficult time for the state for sure, and a very difficult time for state finances. But being part of that on the front end was an experience I'll never forget. It was invaluable, and it was a great honor to work for the governor under such difficult times, because he was really leaning hard on us at finance and on how we could, in some cases, muddle, and in other cases, just push through all the problems that we faced with state finances. Yeah,
that's awesome. Well, thanks for coming back on. I know in the past we've called this sort of demystifying the state budget. There's a lot definitely to talk about. Before we get into that, just a couple other stories this week. The biggest one being the legislature's back in session. Came back on January 5th, and already, busy as heck around the Capitol right now. How's your return been to sort of the normal session?
It's good. I mean, you're trying to get all of your standing meetings with clients nailed down so you can get a routine and a schedule going. We expected a little bit bigger flurry of activity after the governor announced his budget on Friday. after he announced his budget, but since he did it on a Friday,
Yeah.
we went right into the weekend. We'll see how that goes this week. But, and then, of course, you've got your House of Origin deadline for 2-year bills coming up. So there's policy committees this week. And then, in another week, you guys will be having fiscal committees, and then you'll be on the floor. So things go pretty fast in January.
Especially in the second year, right?
Especially in the second year, man. So we're trying to keep tabs on all that.
Yeah, the second year is always, the first year of a 2-year session, which was, are always the odd years, right? So 2025 was one of those, and January is just really slow.
Yeah.
And everyone's still figuring out their bill packages and their priorities, and their bills are sort of starting to trickle out. But yeah, with the second year, I already had, I've got multiple policy committees already. I had an education committee last week. Yeah. So there's a lot of things percolating already.
A lot of those 2-year bills got amended. A lot of them got amended so that they'll have a chance of getting out. So it'll be interesting to see what your policy committees do.
Absolutely. And so, and then, as if the budget on Friday, he did it a day early, right? It was January 9th.
He did. The constitutional requirement's the 10th.
Right. So I think you wanted to get into that weekend, although he didn't actually do it, which is an interesting part we'll get to. He actually had his budget director give the presentation. I was shocked by that.
I was shocked too, man.
I'm not kidding you. I turned it on because I always watch it, right? I'm very like, I want to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, of course.
Even if I'm running around, I think I was in my car, but I want to hear it. I want to just know what the governor's saying.
Yeah.
I turned it on, and I was kind of busy that morning, and I saw he wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I texted my staff, and I just said, I'm not listening to this.
Yeah.
If the governor's not showing up, I'm just going to read the summaries.
Yeah.
Because I don't even know what I'm doing here. It's just crazy. So I think the media was a little annoyed about that too.
He really set by not showing up.
Yeah.
He set the tone.
Yeah.
For how disappointing this budget is, and this is completely nonpartisan. I'm just saying. We'll get into it more, but I felt sorry for his director of finance, Joe Steppenshaw. I would not have wanted to be an issue.
Did not look fun. Caucus Redux, which is one of the X feeds around here, had something about like a picture of him, and like this is like what happens when your boss asks you to step into the Zoom meeting for him or something. It's just.
Well, the ironic thing is he hadn't shown up for a State of the State speech. He just called it in for the last 4 years. Then he shows up to deliver it live in the legislature. And then the budget's something that up until this year
he's always done.
He's always
over
done
an hour.
For over an hour, and that governor knows the numbers as good as any governor I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Such as they are. And then this year he doesn't even show up.
I know, it's just.
It's weird.
It was very backward. Speaking of State of the State, that was what I was going to say, is like as if the budget wasn't enough. Thursday, the day before, he gave his first State of the State address to a joint session of the legislature since 2020, actually. And actually, that was before my time in the legislature. So this was the first time I had ever seen him give a State of the State in front of the legislature. I do remember watching the one in 2020. In fact, I think that was the one that was all about homelessness. It was all about solving homelessness, which I would argue hasn't been solved. But and then COVID hit, and obviously things sort of changed from there in terms of him doing like a recorded address or a letter or whatever, meeting the constitutional requirement, but not actually coming.
So let's give him a pass for a couple of years because of COVID.
Right. But then he just said, this is just better. It's easier, And so it was really interesting sitting in that room. Again, my first experience just sitting there listening, and also the governor's final State of the State address, right? Yeah. Which is sort of interesting as well. And, just listening, hearing him out. So we're going to make it our clip of the week. I'm going to play one clip here.
All right.
And then get your reaction. I'll give a little reaction to how it was sitting in the room, and we'll go from there.
Okay, perfect.
California, property crime. Property crime down, aggravated assault down, car theft down, burglary down, robbery down, violent crime down. California cities are seeing record low homicide rates. Oakland, the lowest homicide rate since 1967. LA, the lowest since 1966. My old town, San Francisco, they're going to have to update their talking points, aren't they? My old town, San Francisco, the lowest homicide rate since 1954. 1954. Okay. Again, we got more work to do, but to those with that California derangement syndrome, I'll repeat, it's time to update your talking points.
So that I play that clip because I think it really encapsulates sort of the tone of the entire thing. He went for I think an hour and 4 minutes, by the way, which I think was
a long speech.
A little long. But it was a very political speech. It was very much sort of, I would say setting up his presidential run. It was very, critical of California detractors.
Yeah.
And then that clip in particular was so fascinating to me. Just the sort of his willingness to take credit for something I think he had very little to do with. And when I say that, I mean, he's bragging about reductions in crime statistics a year after the voters passed Proposition 36, which he opposed to amend, how we approach crime in California and actually restore some accountability in the criminal system. And so, which again, an effort he opposed, and then to see that happen, it was a little frustrating from my side of the street, but also, pretty eye opening.
This isn't meant to put you on the spot.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Do you think that his statistics were accurate?
Well, again, that would be something I need to review, right? Because the governor has this, he's really good at handpicking statistics.
Yes, he is.
That support a narrative,
Well,
right?
there's a reason, you might have seen this since you represent a swath of the Sacramento Valley. There's a reason why I'm asking that question, not trying to be snarky or anything, but an unlikely source, the Sacramento Bee editorial page, I don't know, 4 or 5 days ago, I couldn't believe it. I've never read anything like this in the Bee, at least with this governor. They essentially said, and I'm not quoting them, but I'm getting it essentially correct. They said, you can't believe the governor's numbers, especially when it comes to homelessness. And then they did a whole thing where they said, the governor apparently during the State of the State talked about homelessness being down 9%.
Yes, he did.
And then they explained how we got that number, which was as sort of an ad hoc back of the envelope calculation and did not reflect in any way sort of a comprehensive look at the major counties in the state and what was actually going on. And they ended their editorial by saying, you can't trust the governor's numbers, but you can trust your own eyes. And I thought this is
powerful.
This is a progressive editorial department, and they said that about this governor. So I was really surprised at that. That's why I asked you. I mean, because I haven't personally done the research to know whether those, he's cherry picking those numbers.
The crime statistics I haven't looked into. The homelessness. So he made 2 big claims on homelessness in his State of the State. The first was that. And this was all based on new numbers that have yet to be released, which I'm always skeptical of, right? It's like, we just got, hot off the presses for this speech. We got these new numbers that say homelessness has gone down by 9%. That was his claim, right?
Yeah.
And I am extremely skeptical of that number. And I think the Sacramento Bee is right to be skeptical of that number because not a single year in his governorship has homelessness gone down. In fact, when he started, we were 116, I think, thousand homeless individuals in the state. Today, we're over 180,000. So he's even this
just during his term,
just during his time in office, right? I mean, that is an astounding increase.
It's bad. It's bad.
When you look at an issue that he said at the beginning was his goal to solve it, it got so much worse under his tenure.
Well, what about your audit? Did they ever figure out where all the money's been going?
Well, I mean, and so that's another part of this, right? And he'll always claim that, oh no, the audit, the money was spent on good things. It just, we don't.
We just don't know what they were.
His press office actually always pushes back. Anytime my audit gets cited by people all the time on X and across social media, and the governor's office is always saying, "Oh, that's inaccurate." The auditor, none of that is actually true, and all this stuff. It's really interesting to watch. But no, I think that's the point, right? At this point, it's been over $30 billion in spending, right? And even if, let's say his number's true, let's say he reduced homelessness by 9%, which I don't think is actually accurate. That is still a net increase of tens of thousands of homeless people in the state, right, during his tenure. So it is not a victory lap, even as he defines it, in my opinion. So I think the homelessness stuff was interesting. He also, his second claim I didn't mention was they've cleaned up 19,000 encampments. Now, that 19,000 encampments across the state. Now that I would need to fact check. There is a possibility that is true, depending on how you define encampment, right? And if it is, that was in large part the road was paved for that by the Supreme Court in the grants pass decision. That was largely the work of local governments. That was not the work of the state. Now Governor Newsom would argue, well, we sent him some money, and he did do a photo op at one of them, I remember, where he showed up and actually picked up some trash and stuff. But that was largely the work of local governments, and it was because the Supreme Court empowered communities to clean these encampments up. And so, the credit. It is a big accomplishment, and I'm grateful for the encampments that have been cleaned up, but the credit doesn't really belong with the governor.
Well, governors take credit for things that they don't deserve, and to be fair, governors also take criticism for things that aren't really in their control. So that pendulum swings both ways. I mean, if I was Governor Newsom and I knew that there were 19,000 homeless encampments cleaned up, I'd
shout that number too. Absolutely. Yeah. No, and I don't actually blame him for mentioning the encampments. And every politician is going to take credit for something, even if it's not fully there. Yeah. If it happened under their watch, right? And so, I get that. I get the politics of that. Yeah. But I just find it interesting, and particularly in that clip, they need to change their talking points. I mean, the sad part is this California derangement syndrome that he's describing. What he didn't mention is that we're still #1 in poverty in the nation. We're still 50th in literacy. We still have the highest unsheltered homeless population in the entire country. We have the highest unemployment rate today. We used to be second. Now we're first in unemployment.
I was going to talk about that.
I mean, you go down the list, and it's like these detractors have a point, right? Now, I love California. This isn't to bash our state. But I'm talking about these things because I want it to be better.
Well, it's our policies that brought us to this point. So you can't turn a blind eye to the fact we have the highest unemployment rate of any state in the country. There's only we're at 5.4% on the latest national statistics. There's only one jurisdiction in the entire country that has a higher rate, and that's Washington, D.C. They're a point higher at 6.4. For a governor that wants to talk about how great an economy we have, it really doesn't satisfy his narrative to say we've got the highest unemployment rate. And it's not just that we have the highest rate. Just since you mentioned the unemployment, I'm sort of jumping ahead of my talking points. Fine. But if you look at, and there's lots of state and national organizations that publish these statistics quarterly, in some cases every month. If you look at the employment trends in California, if you back out the healthcare sector, and I know that's a big sector, but if you back out healthcare and you back out government jobs, we haven't created any new jobs in the state in 18 months. Yeah. It's been completely, finance, manufacturing, logistics. All of these different industries, construction that, generate jobs. We don't have any net new job creation in California. So that's a really, really hard barometer to measure the state's success with. But back to what you're saying about Newsom, he's not mentioning those things, and his detractors do. But it's not just politics, because if we're really failing in all these areas on homelessness, on various economic and social issues, we have to look at our policies that put us here. You're a policymaker, so you and your colleagues have the opportunity to change laws, eliminate laws, create new laws that will foster and encourage a better social and economic development state. So you have to look at where things aren't going well. It's not about being a naysayer.
No, absolutely.
You got to acknowledge them and think, what can we do? What can we do better?
And that's really the goal. I think one of the goals with this podcast, and also just my work in the legislature, is, we need leadership that's willing to make some big policy changes, right? It's not just about spending money. Yes. It's not just about, platitudes, right? We need some policy changes in California if we're going to change some of these things. And
100%.
And I hope to see that in the next governor. I think this governor's time obviously is nearing its end, and I don't expect a ton of huge risks taken this year, but on a policy side. But that's what I would love to see from the next governor.
Well, that's a good segue to the budget if you want to go there.
It is. One more note on the state of the state, because I was going to be fair and mention a couple things I actually agreed with the governor on, right? Because I don't want to, just be negative. But he did name as one of his biggest accomplishments my legislation, the Phone Free Schools Act, which I thought was very cool to hear, right? And also mentioned and sort of hinted and teased, and I guess I'll tease it here as well, some potential legislation this year to go even farther, not on this phone-free schools, but on limiting the harms of social media among young people under 16.
There's some countries around the world that are doing
Yes,
that.
he mentioned Australia in his speech. And I will just say that there is a small collection, including myself, of legislators working right now on looking into some options there for California. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But the fact that the governor mentioned it, I think, does mean that we may have his support for that. So look forward to working with him.
I hope they include you in that working group.
Oh, I'm already in it,
good.
and you know, I've been, it's actually a very strong bipartisan effort.
Good.
So I'm excited to be part of that. And then, you know, he also mentioned a crisis among young men, and that he wants to address, you know, some of the loneliness and suicide statistics and the real problems going on with young men in our society. Fully support him, those efforts as well. So there are some things where there is agreement, but definitely some things where there's not. So,
Well, I'm glad that you can find areas that you do agree
Yeah.
with the governor, and there's probably a lot of areas where Republicans and Democrats agree once they stop, you know, focusing on their differences. But
yeah.
as far as the state budget goes, I think it is overall, it's indicative of what you said a moment ago, which is he's on the way out. He's got aspirations for national office. He hasn't announced yet, but everybody knows he's, barring some major development, he's running for president. And this budget is about the most risk-averse document I've ever seen in my career. But let's go through, and let's be fair to the governor, talk about some of the good things.
Okay.
And I think some of which he can take credit for. And then since the budget just came out on Friday, I did look at the documents over the weekend.
Yeah.
But we don't have some of sort of the up-to-the-date analyses from the non-partisan legislative analysts.
right.
But I am going to use some of their numbers and analyses from their mid-November fiscal update, because that was only 6 weeks prior to the budget coming out. So I think those numbers are probably still pretty good. Although some will say that the revenues have been performing so much better than anybody anticipated.
Yeah.
As an aside, let me say, I don't know if you remember this. Back in May, I told you, Newsom gave a very partisan May revision update, and he called we had a Trump slump.
Right.
And that revenues were down by $6 billion.
Yeah.
And I sat here and I told you, and I said, well, you know, to be honest about it, even the Department of Finance notes in their revenue analysis for the May revise that they picked the low point on the S&P 500 index, which was right after Trump announced Independence Day. There was a brief stock market sell-off.
Right.
Finance picked that low point to build their capital gains model. And since a big chunk of personal income that goes in the general fund comes from capital gains, when they projected that low point out over the budget forecast, the revenues came in much lower. And they said it was the Trump slump. Okay, so now you fast forward, and we're going to talk about this in just a moment here, literally. There's this they're saying a big surge in revenues. And what I was saying over the fall was, obviously we're going to have an increase in revenues because I'm not going to say they cooked the books, but they picked the most pessimistic point they possibly could have in April of last year to run their capital gains for the May revise. So inevitably, we were going to have higher revenues. So anyways, that's just...
They sort of set it up that way.
Yeah. Well, and that may be Tom Sheehy saying, you know, I told you so, but I did. And they did set it up that way. Well, just so you know, when you have me back, I like to have a little continuity.
Oh, no, I think it's great. And just like top numbers, and I'll let you sort of give us the overview.
Yeah.
But we've got, you know, it is a $348.9 billion proposal, budget proposal, $248.3 billion general fund proposal. And so that's a total budget of $539 billion. And I'll let you kind of explain, right? The LAO in the report you're just citing came out and said $18 billion deficit.
Yeah.
This number's, according to the governor's, different because of those revenues. So talk to us about that.
100%. So let's go through it. First, let's give him credit for a couple good things. So the first, I always like to start with what's good. That list has gotten a little shorter, but there's still some good things, at least in my opinion. First of all, there's no general tax increases that he's proposing. And I think up until the point he released his revenue estimates, a number of your progressive colleagues were talking about all sorts of different ways to raise tax revenue because they'd rather do that than to reduce general fund spending. And I understand the politics of that. But the good news is one of the things that I think is good about this budget is he's not proposing any new tax increases. The governor fully funds Prop 98 over the 3-year budget window. That budget window being past year, current year, and the budget year, which starts July 1st, the 26-27 fiscal year. So he fully funds Prop 98. That's always a good thing. We're in, not to get into the weeds on it, but we're in what's called Test 1 all 3 years, which means that the schools, the K-12 plus community colleges, their share of the general fund budget is guaranteed at 40%.
Okay. That's
what Test 1 does. It says that's 40%. So every new dollar that comes in, they're going to get at least 40%. In some cases, they'll get a higher percentage than that. That's if they have to pay back what's called maintenance factors and other things that cause there to be, or if they have to settle up with the Prop 98 guarantee because the revenues came in different than they had originally projected. But Test 1 is a 40% guarantee. So he's fully funding Prop 98. That's a good thing. It's good for schools. It's good for schools in your district and across the state. Plus, they fully fund a cost of living adjustment in the local control
funding formula.
Funding formula. Yep. That's going to be about 2.4%. And as we'll talk about more in a moment, he also is telling you as the legislature and us as the general public that there are billions of dollars more in revenue in his forecast than he thought there was going to be in May.
Right.
And one other thing, we talked about law enforcement previously, despite the fact that he is not funding Prop 36, and we talked about that. I know your colleagues and even some Democrats have been concerned about that. He did propose to continue funding for fentanyl interdiction, and that was something he didn't have to do, but that's going to be an additional $15 million, not billion, million in the budget year. So those are all good things.
Let me ask you about one of those things. Okay, so you did mention one of the good things is no general tax increase proposals, which I agree with. I think that is good news, and I'm very grateful to see that. However, there is an effort right now, going on to propose a wealth tax in California. Right now, this doesn't involve the governor as it sits right now. But there is an outside effort to get that, I think, on the ballot, I believe. So
SEIU.
SEIU is pushing a wealth tax on the ballot. They were actually interviewed recently by Ashley Zavala, did a piece on the wealth tax. I don't know if you want to give predictions on whether that qualifies or passes, but what sort of impact would that have on the budget?
It's already having an impact.
I agree.
There was an article this morning I read in my news clips. It was not the Sacramento Bee. I forget the gentleman's name, but he was one of the key co-founders of Google.
Yeah, it's Larry and Sergey. Anyway.
So you're aware of this.
I have the Alphabet founders are talking about leaving.
Well, they've already quietly. They didn't do press. They didn't hold press conferences. They've already moved a bunch of their corporations. LLCs, partnerships, and other corporations that all surround how they manage their businesses and protect their assets. They've moved them all to Nevada. And this is a first step in the process of reducing their California footprint. They're illustrative of a number of very, very wealthy individuals. You know, Josh, the narrative used to be, and I think in some quarters still is, that highly affluent individuals won't leave the state if you come after them with higher taxes. And there was a period of time in the 90s and early 2000s where the data and the statistics proved that out to be true. A couple of years ago, Chapman College, which is a private university, very well-regarded university down in Southern California, their economics department released a study that showed that, in fact, high-income earners are sensitive to higher taxes, and they are part of this crowd that's leaving the state. A lot of people are leaving California because housing is so expensive, everything's so expensive here, and they think they can do better in Arizona, Nevada, Idaho, Texas, where have you. But we know now that the behavior of highly affluent individuals is impacted by these higher taxes and proposals. So we're already seeing that SEIU initiative. They haven't even gathered enough signatures yet, which they'll probably get enough signatures.
I would guess they
Hopefully somebody will talk them to pulling that from the ballot because it's already driving people to make decisions to leave the state. Now, why does that matter? People say, so what, we lose another billionaire here or there? Well, I think most people at this point that follow public policy know what I'm about to say to be true, which is that the personal income tax is almost 70%. It's like 67, 68% of the general fund. And a big chunk of that is capital gains. And it turns out, if you just do the math, that the top 1% of taxpayers, that's about 139,000 returns of FTB returns. Top 1% of taxpayers pay almost 50% of all the money that comes in by way of personal income tax. So personal income tax is almost 2/3 of the budget. and the highest earners in the state are paying half of the of taxes that go into the personal income tax, then you've got this small little sliver of individuals here that are controlling 1/3 of the state's revenue. And so we're talking about a huge amount of money here. Every single one of them that leaves, we feel. Every single one of them. It's a big deal. And Governor Newsom, you'll notice, he is not coming out saying that he supports higher taxes. Why? Because he doesn't want to accelerate that trend of people leaving the state.
Well, and Governor Newsom, if I was Governor Newsom right now, I would be very worried, right, about this proposal, and not even worried that it might pass or even qualify, but just the mere possibility of it.
Yeah.
The mere possibility of a wealth tax is literally today, as you mentioned, pushing the taxable income from higher earners out of the state.
Yep.
So even, let's just say on balance, this thing it ultimately fails, right? This effort gets pulled from the ballot or it fails at the ballot box. I think just proposing it is self-sabotage, right? Because the groups that are really wanting that revenue to increase it's going to result in less revenue and less innovation and probably less economic opportunity.
Less jobs. Yeah,
right? Yeah,
100%.
Fewer jobs than if it had never been proposed in the first place. To me, it's a tremendous self-sabotage.
It's really unfortunate. I mean, no matter what side of the political aisle you're on, it's really unfortunate. Well, so let's talk a little bit about this. I wanted to mention some of the good things. Here's the problem in my judgment, and there's people that are much smarter than I am that are already writing about this, talking about it. I have a lot of respect for the legislative analysts. I think they're really, a top shelf public service organization with a lot of smart people there. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is reflected in their analyses. But when the Analyst, excuse me, I had a bad chest cold at the end of the year. I'm still
it's all good.
suffering. I'm pretty good. I feel great now. I just have a little bit of congestion. The Analyst released their November update, which was right before Thanksgiving, so it was less than 2 months ago. And they said that there was going to be, they said two things that were really noteworthy. First of all, they said there was going to be $11 billion more in revenue over this 3-year budget window than what you and your colleagues were told and voted on in the May revise, which was the final budget. They also said that the structural budget deficit for the 26-27 fiscal year, this is the budget year we're talking about now that you're going to be deliberating that starts July 1st, that estimate of a budget deficit had grown from, everybody agreed it was going to be a $13 billion gap when you voted on the budget last June. It was in the governor's documents. They said that number had grown to $18 billion. So it was sort of good news, bad news. Good news was there's going to be some more revenue. The bad news is the structural deficit's going up by $5 billion to $18 billion. Okay. Governor Newsom's budget that his director of finance trotted out on Friday says that there's going to be $42 billion more in revenue. That's $31 billion more than the Analyst. And remember, the Analyst report just came out 6 weeks before the budget, so it's not like they did their analysis 3 months ago and have totally missed the boat here. The governor said there's going to be $42 billion in additional revenue, and that the deficit in 26-27 that he had to solve for was only $2.9 billion.
Yep.
And he takes care of that by simply not making a deposit in the budget stabilization account, which he has the authority to do. And so in essence, what he's saying is that there's so much money that's coming into the state treasury now, we don't have to make any cuts and we don't have to raise any taxes. That's what he's saying.
And he, even in his State of the State, proposed some new spending.
And he's proposed some new spending. So, gee, that sounds like, candy canes and caramel apples. And
Absolutely.
that sounds pretty good. The problem is it's highly, highly, highly unlikely to materialize. And you're going to, when the Ledge Analyst comes out with their initial take on probably later today or tomorrow, I hope I'm right here, but they're probably going to say that what the governor is suggesting is plausible but highly unlikely. To be fair, I do think that the $42 billion increase is probably within the range of probability. So when finance does the revenues every year, they look at a low outcome, a high outcome, and a middle outcome. The 7 years that I worked there, both as staff and then as part of their management, we never went with a real high probability, the highest revenue probability, because it's more risk. If you build a budget based upon that and then you don't hit that, you're creating or adding to a structural budget deficit. Well, what this budget document that's before you and your colleagues does is it looks at, just by their own numbers, it looks at the most rosy possible scenario with the stock market, with AI companies, okay, and related stocks that are driving this, continuing to have double-digit gains in equity and stock valuation, and they project that out over the entire 18 months of the budget period.
Wow.
And they come up with a $42 billion increase in revenue. That's 3 times higher than what the Ledge analyst had just said 6 weeks earlier. I think that most nonpartisan analysts would say that's a highly unlikely event. Okay, so what does that mean? On the other side of the equation, has the governor proposed any significant reductions in general fund spending? Unfortunately, the answer is no. So he has, and of course we know the politics of it, right? I mean, all of your viewers know if you start proposing big cuts in social services or education, this is very unpopular. It's a very difficult thing to do. But the analyst says in their November forecast, they talk about the state. This is back in November. They said the state's budget position is, quote, very weak, that the state's budget resiliency is decreasing because of all the one-time and low-hanging fruit that we've done. And they said that there are a number of risks even in their forecast, with $11 billion in revenue coming in. So let's talk about what this means then to you and your colleagues, to the governor's legacy, and to legislators that are in office. Let's just say that all of the governor's numbers are accurate. There's a lot of, that's a very, very, very rosy scenario, but let's just say all the revenues come in and the spending comes in as he has, as he's reported. Okay, great. The good news is you don't have to make any real tough votes this year on the budget.
Right.
The bad news is even by the governor's own numbers, the out years are going to go from 20 to 30 billion each year. I think 22 billion the first year in structural budget deficit, meaning just looking at current law expenditures for health and human services, education, so on, and current law revenues for the state general fund, $22 billion in budget year plus one. That's what the governor's numbers. The analysts, it's $35 billion.
Wow.
And it's $35 billion in budget plus one. They have a little chart right here, and it's 35 in budget plus two. Plus, the analyst is basically saying that the fish mouth that I first introduced to your audience a couple years ago, it's never closing.
Yeah.
They said unless, the fish mouth being my top hand being the expenditure line and my bottom hand, the revenue line, they're never coming together, which is what you need. The analyst said there has to be major reductions in spending or major increases in revenue or some combination thereof, or we're not fixing our structural budget deficit. Now, Governor Newsom was able, unfortunately for Governor Newsom, the last 4 years, every single year of his second term, he's been facing a structural budget deficit. And in previous years, he tried with proposals to reduce general fund spending, a lot of which were unsuccessful. Some of them were successful, but it's very difficult to get a legislative majority that's very progressive to reduce state spending. So then you have to ask yourself, he inherited a balanced budget, even with the surplus from Jerry Brown. How did we get to this point? It's important to, we don't want to beat anybody up, but we shouldn't forget history. 4 years ago, in 2022, at the May revise, the Department of Finance, and they weren't the only ones, they came out and they said there was a $165 billion increase over the 3-year budget forecasting. And they said that as a result of all that, there was a net state surplus, meaning money on the table that was above and beyond what was necessary to run the prisons and run the schools, a net surplus of $97 billion.
I remember that.
And this Governor Newsom, made a really big deal out of that. I mean, there was more than one press conference where he touted California's the 4th or 5th largest economy in the world, and we're a progressive state, and we're doing all these great progressive things. And by the way, we have the largest surplus of any state in the history of this country. That's what he said.
Yeah.
Okay. It turned out to be, he didn't understand it at the time, but it turned out to be completely untrue. That surplus, as you know, we've talked about, it was a mirage. That money never showed up in the state treasury. And what happened was, your colleagues, were you in office in 22?
I was. It was my first year.
I don't know how you voted, so I'm not saying it was your fault.
Oh, no, I did not support the spending barrage that followed.
In a number of health and human service programs and education, a number of areas in the budget that are general fund, the spending got ratcheted up. A lot of people that had ornaments were able to finally put an ornament on the Christmas tree that they were told was okay because we had someone. The state started spending like a drunken sailor, and the governor went along with it. Now, one of the things that I've learned, okay, as staff for a long time in the executive branch and staff in the legislature, now just being an advocate and watching government from the outside, is there's really only one person that can be the adult in the room.
Yeah.
With a legislature that has an insatiable appetite to spend. It doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Everybody wants to spend more money on the programs they like.
They
whether
care
it be
about,
fighting crime or increasing benefits to the to poor people, maybe SNAP benefits or what have you. But it's the governor, it's the executive that has to say, no, we can't afford that.
Yep. That's what Jerry Brown famously did that, a lot. And not always, sometimes, not always, but, he would be the adult in the room, right?
Jerry Brown was absolutely the adult in the room. So unfortunately for Governor Newsom, he didn't do that 4 years ago. And he gave in to all the spending because he was told they had this unbelievable surplus.
Yeah.
Well, he's now spent the last 4 years, and he's going to spend the last year of his governorship trying to fix that. And this budget is so disappointing, Josh, because we know we have a structural budget problem. A year ago, we knew we had a structural budget problem. 2 years ago, a lot of one-time things, fund shifts, delays, deferrals, internal borrowing has been used to put off the day of reckoning. But those options, as the legislative analyst says here, that the budget resiliency is greatly waning because we've done all of these accounting maneuvers and whatnot, and now we have to face, we're in this situation because of what happened 4 years ago. And what's disappointing about this budget is that this is the governor's last chance to try to fix that, and it just kicks the can down the road, quite literally.
It's just amazing. It was almost a, your company tells you, I think we're going to be able to give Christmas bonuses this year, And then you say, awesome. And you go out and you buy all these presents for your family, and you buy a new car, and you buy some other stuff. And then it turns out, no, unfortunately, that bonus isn't going to be coming anymore. But you've already spent the money. And so after the State of the State, I had the pleasure of having my state senator, Roger Nilo, sit next to me on the floor for the State of the State. And we did a joint interview afterwards with one of the local news networks. And they asked us about the budget. They asked us about the revenues. And Roger who is the vice chair of the budget committee on the Senate side.
He's very knowledgeable about budget.
Very knowledgeable on this stuff, right? And he's been on the podcast. We've talked a little bit about it. But the reporter asked him, so what do you think of all these revenues? These big revenues the governor's talking about. And Roger said, well, revenues are great, but they don't really matter if you keep continuing to spend more and more year after year after year.
That's right.
Those revenues mean absolutely nothing, right? Because to your point, you can't close that fish mouth that you have described to the listeners many times, which is that structural deficit over time.
Yes.
And, according to our numbers, we've got $26.5 billion projected deficit in 27-28, $22.4 in 28-29, $23.1 billion in 29-30. That's the future if we keep spending.
Yeah, it's a real problem. And as it's been pointed out, and as I just said a moment ago, a lot of the easy things to vote for that will reduce spending and one of the reasons why the things that you and your colleagues voted on the last couple of years to balance the budget hasn't ended this structural deficit is because they were one-time fixes.
Right.
When you pay with special fund money, what otherwise be a general fund cost, and you do it 1 year, that doesn't reduce the spending. That just changes the fund source.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's a problem. Let's talk just for a moment about the economy, because the economy is always the underpinnings for the budget, because it determines how much revenue you're going to collect. We talked about unemployment already, and there's a lot of warning signs there for California. Unemployment is, again, with the exception of healthcare and government, local government and state government, and I guess federal government as well, everything has been flat. So we're not creating a lot of new jobs in the state, despite the fact that we're the fourth largest economy. If you've got 40 million people living here, you're going to be one of the world's largest economies. That's just by definition.
By design.
By design, by the population. And then the big driver, whether you go with the governor's numbers or the legislative analyst numbers, the big driver of this is the stock market. And the S&P 500 index has raised over 50%, has increased over 50% in the last 2 years.
It's incredible.
Now, it's possible that artificial intelligence will continue this trend line that the governor's riding with his $42 billion in revenue he's claiming. But I think one thing that history tells us, and maybe history will be different, but history tells us that the stock market has been over-exuberant over technology. Just go back 20 years ago or 25 years ago to the whole dot-com bubble.
100%.
Everybody thought that there was going to be no end to how much more money these internet companies were going to be making when things were really taking off. And then what did that lead us to? That led us to a recession, the bursting of the dot-com bubble. Now, hopefully that won't happen here, but price-earnings ratios are high, which means there's more risk. The S&P 500 index can't go up at that rate interminably. At some point, there's going to have to be a correction or even a recession. I hope we don't have a recession anytime soon. But the point is that this budget that the governor's given you didn't build in any mechanism to account for a possible turn down in the stock market. You guys are going to, if that happens, you guys are going to be scrambling. Because you could see easily 20, 30, or $40 billion just go poof, just like that.
Yeah, there's no off ramps. And I think too, when you put all your faith, right, in a stock market based on technology, there's a lot of risk in the AI world, right? There's a lot of chance that investors could pull back on AI, right, in 2026. Maybe there's some really successful things that continue to drive, a lot of this growth. But maybe we have some issues in the AI space, which is very possible, that actually discourages investors and reduces growth. So it is a very risky budget, and it's also a budget where he's basically saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just going to let the next guy deal with the long-term problem.
100%. That's exactly what that is. Well, so what does that mean? Now again, this isn't meant to be partisan or to pick.
Sure.
But what does that mean when you say that? It means you're not demonstrating any leadership.
Right.
If you say, well, I'm just going to paper the problem over by having my Department of Finance come with a really rosy revenue picture. That way I don't have to ask the legislature to make any difficult cuts. I don't have to ask them to make any difficult votes on raising taxes, because that's the other way you get there. He's not showing any leadership, and yet he wants to be president. He wants to be the leader of the free world, and he's not even leading California on one of our biggest issues, which is the state's economy and the budget. One other thing I want to point out, it's more of a minor thing, but it's indicative of sort of the situation you guys have been put in. A year or so ago, maybe it was a year and a half ago, the May revised 2 years ago, one of the low-hanging fruit ways to balance the budget was the governor said, well, we're going to make state government more efficient. We've talked about this on your podcast, and they assumed $5 billion in efficiencies, in administrative efficiencies in state government. I think at the time they scored $2 billion in the current year and $3 billion in the budget year, blah, blah, blah. And it was going to be up to the governor's cabinet and other department directors to report back to Department of Finance how they were going to be doing it. When I came in here last year, I sat here and I told you, well, turns out they couldn't find those efficiencies. And so they ratcheted it down from $5 billion. They didn't want to just remove that as scoring those savings because that makes the budget all bigger. They said, well, now it's going to be 3.5. Well, now here we are a year later, and they didn't get that either. In fact, it's very difficult for anybody to report on what those efficiencies were because they were never clearly identified to the legislature. That's a problem. So you can't go to that well and drink again and say, well, we'll solve $5 billion of the budget by saying we're going to be more efficient. It didn't work. That was also a phantom savings. Now, just one other area, corrections. Now, corrections has had problems with their budgets, even going back to when I was still staff. But unfortunately, this governor hasn't done anything about fixing there's an internal deficit within the corrections budget. They get almost $1 billion because they're a really, really big operation. I shouldn't say billion, it's much more than $1 billion. They've had an internal deficiency, it's called a deficiency, difference between how much they're actually spending and what's appropriated to them, of upwards of $800 to $900 million. Wow. And they keep papering over it, say, well, they'll reduce spending, they'll be more efficient, they'll do this, they'll do that. And right now, the Analyst has reported in their November update that there's $850 million more in expenditures in the corrections budget than they were appropriated. And that's going to be another deficiency.
Yeah.
Well, unless you start cleaning those types of things up, you have just less and less room to balance the budget.
Sure.
And that's the situation you and your colleagues have been put in, and the situation that you're looking at. And I don't, for those members that are going to term out in 2026, they may miss some of the really difficult votes that are coming if this course continues like this and the governor papers over it. But you're not, because you're coming back. And most of your colleagues are coming back.
Yeah.
And you're going to be the next governor.
He's going to have a big job on his hands.
He or she are going to have to fix this. They can't. After 4 years of using all the budget gimmicks to get through this, if we're facing a $20 or $30 billion structural deficit next year, the next governor is going to have to address this. There'll be no way to paper that over, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that is that's a great overview. I think it's a great look at what we can expect this year. It's interesting. The media has been pretty critical of the governor's budget. I think surprisingly, but KCRA actually had some of the Department of Finance folks on the show on, I think it was Sunday.
Oh, how did that go?
It was interesting. You might want to go watch it.
KCRA?
Yeah, it was Ashley Zavala's new show.
Oh, okay.
Politics 360,
She's great.
I think it is.
I love Ashley.
Well, and she asked, she said, look, critics are saying that, you're really relying heavily on these revenues, but you're not really doing anything to solve these structural deficits, right? The response from the Department of Finance was, well, we're going to have a lot more detail in May, right? We're gonna know a lot more in May. We're going to have some real good solutions lined up in May.
That's the classic H.D. Palmer response.
I mean, really, I feel like this is always the response under this governor, right? Is that the next update we give you, we're going to be able to answer those questions. And I do get that we have a better budget picture in May. That's why we do the May revise. But at the end of the day, we need to be developing these solutions today, right? And we're not doing that. So.
No, you're not. And you've got 5 months until the May revise. Yeah. And all those subcommittee hearings. I know you're not on the budget. You're still not on the budget.
I'm not on the budget committee.
Well, all
at this
those
point,
subcommittee hearings that your colleagues are going to be on, and they're not going to be able to have the discussions about what really needs to be done to balance the budget, because what they're going to wait till May with an update.
Yeah.
That's I'm sorry, that's a bunch of baloney. And they have all the information they need right now. And I'll tell you what, I'll make a really bold prediction, and you can hold me to it.
All right.
I think there's only one, and I'll eat crow if I'm wrong. I think there's only one direction that the revenue forecast can possibly go for the Department of Finance and this governor in the May revise, and that's to go down.
I think that is a solid projection. We're going to have you back in May.
Okay.
And we're going to hold you to that.
I mean, I hope I'm wrong.
Hey,
but I don't think I am.
And I'll be honest with you. I hope you're wrong too. But at the end of the day, you have to have a more conservative approach to this, right? The LAO tends to do a much more conservative approach to the budget, as opposed to painting the most rosy picture as the governor's done here. So with that, we're going to end on that.
Okay.
And I'm going to have you back in May.
Great.
And we'll see where things are at.
That sounds great.
With the May revise. You can email questions if you have any ideas for the podcast, pointoforderpod@gmail.com. You can follow myself on X at Joshua_Hoover. You can follow the podcast on socials at PointOfOrderPod. And you can follow and learn more about Tom Sheehy and Sheehy Strategy Group on X. I think it's at Sheehy Strategy.
That's right.
And Tom, as always, appreciate you coming on, demystifying some of these issues for us, and look forward to having you back in May.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it, and I'll look forward to talking with you soon.
All right. See you then.